The rain had stopped without warning, as if it had reached a conclusion I hadn't been invited to. 1 second it had been tapping insistently against the diner windows, thin silver lines sliding down the glass, and the next the street outside looked rinsed and stunned, the pavement dark and reflective like a held breath. The quiet afterward felt louder than the storm. I noticed it the way you notice silence when you've been bracing for noise, too suddenly, too completely. Inside the diner, everything slowed to match it. The hum of the refrigerator, the low hiss of the grill, the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain somewhere behind the counter. Even the air felt still, heavy with old warmth and the smell of burned coffee that had been sitting too long on its plate. I was seated in the booth closest to the door, the one people usually avoided because of the draft and the constant interruption of people coming and going. I'd chosen it on purpose. I liked knowing I could leave without weaving through other bodies, without being noticed. My coat was folded beside me, sleeves tucked neatly inward, my purse resting on the floor where my foot could feel its presence. The mug in my hands had gone cold, but I kept holding it anyway, palms wrapped around ceramic that no longer offered comfort. My fingers were numb, not from the temperature, but from how long I'd been gripping things too tightly lately, cups, handles, words I didn't want to say. The receipt lay flat on the table, aligned with the edge like I'd taken time to square it. My name was written at the bottom in blue ink, the letters pressed hard enough that I could feel the grooves when I traced over them with my nail. I kept doing that, back and forth, following the familiar shape of myself as if I needed proof I was still here. I had already paid. That part was done. It should have been enough to stand up and go. I told myself I was fine. The thought repeated quietly, rhythmically, the way you tell yourself something when you're trying to make it true. I'd stood up from worse tables than this. Kitchens, conference rooms, bedrooms where the air felt heavier than it should. This was just a diner. Linoleum floor. Vinyl seats. Nothing here could hurt me. The diner was almost empty, the hour caught between lunch and dinner, when people were either rushing somewhere else or already home. A couple sat in the far corner, their heads angled toward each other, voices low and intimate like they were protecting a fragile secret from the rest of the room. I didn't look at them for long. There was something about togetherness that made my chest ache lately, even when it wasn't mine to carry. Near the counter, a man stared at his phone, one hand wrapped around a fork he hadn't lifted in several minutes. Life paused in these small places, I thought. Or maybe it just revealed itself more clearly. I slid out of the booth slowly. The vinyl sighed beneath me, the sound too loud in my ears. Pins and needles rushed through my legs, a bright tingling that made me pause with one hand still on the table. My body needed a moment to remember how to hold itself upright. I waited, breathing carefully, like if I moved too fast I might spill something invisible. When the feeling settled into a dull ache, I reached for my coat, fingers brushing the soft fabric as if to reassure myself it was real. That was when I felt her before I saw her. She was standing beside me, close enough that her presence altered the air. I hadn't heard her approach. The waitress moved that way, quiet, practiced, like someone who had learned not to announce herself. She had been refilling sugar jars earlier, aligning them in neat rows, wiping down counters that were already clean. Dark hair pulled back tight at the nape of her neck. A face that held kindness without advertising it, the kind that comes from watching carefully rather than assuming. "Hey," she said softly. I turned toward her, surprised by how near she was. "Hi," I replied, my voice automatically polite. "You okay?" she asked. The question was gentle, almost casual, but her eyes didn't drift away the way most people's did. She was looking at me like she expected a real answer. I nodded. Of course I did. The motion was quick, efficient. "Yeah, I'm fine." She didn't say anything right away. Her gaze flicked briefly to my hands, still gripping the edge of the table, then to the door behind me. The glass reflected the dimming sky, the streetlight just beginning to glow. "Promise me something," she said. The request caught me off guard. "What?" I asked, a faint laugh escaping before I could stop it. She reached past me and turned the lock on the door. The click was clean and final, slicing through the quiet like a dropped fork. The sound echoed in my chest, sharp and disorienting. Promise you won't pass out, she said. The words didn't belong there. They felt misplaced, too big for the room, like someone had spoken a thought out loud that was meant to stay hidden. My mouth opened automatically, ready to dismiss it, to smooth the moment over with humor or reassurance. I was about to say I'd skipped lunch, that I was just tired, that I tended to get lightheaded sometimes, and it was nothing to worry about. Nothing came out. Instead, the room narrowed. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a subtle pulling inward at the edges, like the world was slowly stepping back from me. My vision softened, the corners dimming. The floor beneath my feet tilted ever so slightly, enough that my stomach dropped. I tightened my grip on the table, knuckles whitening. I'm fine, I managed, though my voice sounded far away, like it was coming from another booth entirely. She didn't unlock the door. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, her movements unhurried, deliberate. The vinyl creaked under her weight. Okay, she said calmly. Then we'll just sit for a second. And somehow, despite everything in me insisting I should leave, I did. The chair creaked when I lowered myself into it, the sound stretching longer than it should have, like it wanted attention. My heart was beating too fast, not the sharp panic kind, but the exhausted kind, like it had been running for a long time and only just realized there was nowhere left to go. I pressed my palm flat against the tabletop and felt the faint vibration of it, the hum of the building, the echo of other lives moving through walls I couldn't see. I can't stay, I said, the words slipping out automatically, polished by repetition. I have somewhere to be. She nodded, slow and understanding, as if I'd said something entirely reasonable. You will, she replied. Just not this exact minute. That unsettled me more than if she'd argued. The diner suddenly felt smaller, the locked door behind me heavier now that I was aware of it. I glanced around, taking inventory the way I always did when I felt cornered. The couple in the corner had gone quiet, their heads still close, but their eyes drifting toward us in brief, cautious glances. The man at the counter stared straight ahead now, jaw set, pretending not to notice. No one intervened. No one needed to. This wasn't that kind of scene. I don't want to cause a problem, I whispered. My voice sounded thinner than it had a moment ago. You're not, she said immediately. You're sitting in a chair. I swallowed. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. I could feel sweat gathering at the base of my neck, the unpleasant warmth spreading beneath my collar. My hands began to shake, not violently, just enough that I noticed. Just enough that I hated myself for noticing. The waitress stood and walked behind the counter, her movements steady, unhurried. She filled a glass with water, added ice, then paused. After a brief moment, she tore open 2 sugar packets and poured them in, stirring with a spoon that chimed softly against the glass. She brought it back and placed it in front of me like it was something important. Drink, she said. I obeyed without thinking, lifting the glass with both hands. The ice clinked, loud in my ears. The water was too cold, then suddenly not cold enough. I drank anyway, long pulls that made my chest ache. Some of it spilled over the edge, dampening my fingers. I didn't wipe it away. She watched me carefully, not staring, not looking away either. Like she was anchoring me to the room. I saw you when you came in, she said gently. You moved like someone carrying something heavier than they meant to. I shook my head slightly. I'm just tired. Maybe, she allowed. But tired usually still eats. I froze. You ordered, she continued, her voice neutral, observant. You took 2 bites. Then your phone rang. The memory flickered back in fragments, sharp and intrusive. My phone lighting up on the table. His name. That familiar tightening in my chest before I even answered. The way my shoulders had drawn inward, instinctive, protective. I didn't hear what he said, she went on. But I heard you. My fingers tightened around the glass. What do you mean? You said I'm sorry 3 times, she replied. And okay, more than that. Heat rushed to my face, embarrassment blooming alongside something darker. I opened my mouth to explain, to minimize, to laugh it off, but she kept speaking, her tone careful, respectful. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't get angry. You just got smaller. I looked down at the table, at the faint scratches etched into its surface as names and initials from people who had passed through and left nothing behind. My reflection stared back at me in the glass of water, distorted and unsteady. It's not what you think, I said automatically. She didn't challenge that either. She leaned back slightly, giving me space without leaving. I'm not thinking anything, she said. I'm noticing. That word landed differently. Not judging. Not assuming. Just noticing. The room seemed to tilt again, subtle but undeniable. A ringing crept into my ears, high and distant. I pressed my thumb into the pad of my index finger, grounding myself in the small, sharp sensation. I really need to go, I said, softer now. If I don't. He'll be angry, she finished, not accusing, not dramatic. My throat closed. I nodded once. Silence settled between us, thick and deliberate. It wasn't awkward. It felt intentional, like she was waiting for something to surface on its own. Angry doesn't always mean loud, she said eventually. Sometimes it's quieter than that. My chest tightened. My vision blurred slightly, tears threatening without permission. I hated how easily my body betrayed me, how quickly it reacted to words that felt too close to the truth. I don't want to talk about him, I whispered. Okay, she said immediately. Then we won't. Relief washed through me, unexpected and sharp. My shoulders sagged, just a little. But, she continued gently, we are going to talk about you. I let out a shaky breath. There's not much to say. She tilted her head, studying me. People who say that usually have too much to say and nowhere safe to put it. I looked away, toward the door, the lock gleaming dully in the overhead light. A wave of dizziness rolled through me, stronger this time. My stomach lurched. I closed my eyes, gripping the table harder. Okay, she said, standing abruptly. This is the part where you don't argue with me. Before I could protest, she was beside me, one hand light but firm on my elbow. She guided me toward the booth, her touch confident, practiced. I slid back into the seat, the vinyl cool against my legs. She motioned for me to lie down. I hesitated for half a second, pride flaring weakly, then gave in. The world shifted as I reclined, ceiling lights swimming above me. She placed a folded towel beneath my head, adjusted it until it was just right. The smell of detergent and coffee surrounded me, oddly comforting. Breathe, she said softly. Slow. You're safe. I wanted to laugh at that word. Safe. It felt extravagant. Unreal. But my body responded anyway, inhaling deeply, exhaling longer. No one is coming in, she added. No one is dragging you anywhere. The tears came then, silently, without drama. They slid down the sides of my face, pooling briefly in my hair. I didn't wipe them away. I didn't apologize. I just wanted to eat dinner, I whispered, the truth aching as it left me. I just wanted one quiet thing. I know, she said. The ringing in my ears softened. My heart slowed, each beat less frantic than the last. The ceiling came back into focus, the faint crack running through one of the tiles suddenly fascinating. Minutes passed. Or maybe only seconds. Time felt elastic, unimportant. When I finally sat up, carefully, the room felt steadier. My limbs still heavy, but no longer foreign. She stood nearby, arms loosely crossed, watching me like she'd wait as long as it took. Can I unlock the door now? She asked. I nodded. The click sounded different this time. Less threatening. More like a release. She stepped aside, giving me space. This part is yours, she said. The room softened again, edges blurring not from dizziness this time, but from memory. It happened quietly, the way it always did, one thought slipping into another until the present loosened its grip. The diner faded, the vinyl seat beneath me dissolving into something older, something familiar. I was 8 years old, standing barefoot on cold kitchen tile, the smell of boiled coffee and toast hanging in the air like a warning. The glass had slipped from my hands and shattered, milk spreading across the floor in a slow, deliberate reach. My father sat at the table, newspaper folded with ritual precision. He didn't yell. He never had to. He just looked at the mess, then at me, and said my name the way people say a verdict. I apologized before he spoke again. I learned early that apology could be a currency, a way to restore order, a way to survive. That instinct followed me everywhere. Into classrooms where I raised my hand only when I was sure. Into friendships where I listened more than I spoke. Into love. Especially into love. I remembered my first boyfriend correcting me gently in front of his friends, smiling as he did it. "That's not how it happened," he'd say, and I'd laugh, embarrassed, letting my own memory slip quietly into doubt. When I cried, he called it sensitivity. When I grew quiet, he called it maturity. I absorbed those words, rearranged myself around them, mistaking erosion for growth. I told myself this was what compromise looked like. The man on the phone was only the most recent version of a pattern I knew by heart. He never raised his voice either. He didn't need to. His disappointment carried more weight than anger ever could. He asked questions that felt like accusations and framed control as concern. "Where are you? Why didn't you tell me? You know how this looks." And every time, my body responded before my mind could catch up, heart racing, shoulders folding inward, apologies lining up obediently at the door of my mouth. I had learned that peace came from preemptive surrender. Lying there in the booth, the weight of it pressed down on me, not as panic, but as clarity. I saw the through line, thin but unbroken, stretching from that kitchen floor to the diner ceiling above me. I had spent years managing other people's discomfort, absorbing it into my own body until it manifested as headaches, nausea, dizziness. I called it stress. I called it being tired. I never called it what it was, my body refusing to keep up with a story that was hurting me. The waitress's words echoed softly in my mind. "You don't owe him your body breaking down." They settled somewhere deep, not like advice, but like recognition. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with grief, for the version of myself that learned too early how to disappear politely, for the woman I had been training myself to become smaller and smaller so others could feel large. "I don't know how to stop," I had said, and even now the truth of it lingered. Stopping felt like stepping into air, like letting go of the only rules I'd ever known. But lying there, breathing slowly, I understood something new. I didn't need to know every step forward. I only needed to pause the pattern. To interrupt it. To choose, even briefly, not to comply. The realization didn't arrive loudly. There was no surge of triumph, no dramatic shift. Just a quiet settling inside my chest, like something clicking gently into place. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I was exhausted from carrying what was never meant to be mine. And for the first time, I let myself believe that choosing peace didn't require permission. The silence that followed felt different from the ones I was used to. It wasn't tense or anticipatory, wasn't filled with the familiar dread of waiting for a reaction. It was wide, almost gentle, like a field after snowfall. I sat there with my phone resting in my hand, the screen dim now, my reflection faint and steady in the dark glass. For once, there was nothing demanding my immediate response. No explanation required. No performance expected. The absence of noise revealed something else entirely, space. I became aware of my breath again, the way it moved in and out of my body without effort. My shoulders lowered, muscles releasing one by one as if they had finally received permission to stand down. The tight knot at the base of my skull eased. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had been bracing, how often I lived in preparation rather than presence. Sitting there, I understood that this calm wasn't accidental. It was the result of a choice I had just made, however small it seemed on the surface. I looked at the waitress. She hadn't said anything since I sent the message. She didn't need to. There was no triumph in her expression, no urgency. Just a quiet acknowledgement, like she recognized the shift before I fully did. Her stillness mirrored my own, grounding and unintrusive. In that moment, I understood something important: boundaries didn't require confrontation to be real. They could exist without drama, without witnesses, without explanation. They only needed to be honored by the person setting them. Fear crept in at the edges, as it always did. A whisper of consequences. Of retaliation disguised as hurt. Of being misunderstood. I felt it rise and then, unexpectedly, pass. Not because it wasn't valid, but because it no longer held the final word. For the first time, fear didn't dictate my next move. It simply took a seat somewhere behind me. I stood slowly, testing my balance. My legs held. The room remained steady. It felt symbolic in a way I didn't need to analyze. Sometimes the body understands before the mind can articulate. I gathered my coat, slipping it on with deliberate care, each movement intentional. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't fleeing. I was leaving. At the door, my hand rested on the handle. The cool metal grounded me. I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to mark the moment. To let it register. This wasn't an escape. It was a boundary crossing in the opposite direction. "Thank you," I said, turning back to the waitress. She smiled, small and knowing. "Next time," she said, "sit longer before you leave." I nodded, understanding what she meant. Not just here. Everywhere. Outside, the air was crisp and clean, the rain having scrubbed the city into something quieter. Streetlights flickered on one by one, their glow steady and unassuming. The sidewalk gleamed faintly, reflecting the world back at itself. I took a step, then another, my pace unhurried. Each footfall felt like a claim. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration was sharp, insistent. I didn't stop walking. I didn't reach for it. I let it exist without my participation. The choice felt radical in its simplicity. As I moved down the block, I felt something unfamiliar settle into me, not relief exactly, not joy. Something steadier. A sense of alignment. I wasn't moving toward anyone else's expectations. I was moving toward myself. The realization didn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrived quietly, like dusk. I could still feel the pull of old habits, the urge to explain, to smooth, to fix. But I let that urge pass, watching it drift by like a thought that no longer needed action. This was the boundary. Not a wall. Not a threat. Just a line I had drawn and decided to respect. And as the diner disappeared behind me, its windows glowing softly in the distance, I understood that choosing peace wasn't something that happened once. It was a practice. One I had finally begun. When I got home, the hallway lights flickered on with a muted hum, illuminating the narrow space in a way that felt almost ceremonial. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but expectant, like a room that has been waiting patiently. I closed the door behind me and turned the lock from the inside. The sound was soft, deliberate, a small click that carried more weight than it should have. I stood there for a moment, hand still resting on the knob, letting the finality of it settle into my body. I slipped off my shoes and placed them side by side near the wall, aligning them carefully. It wasn't about neatness. It was about intention. For so long, I had moved through my own spaces distracted, already bracing for interruption, for the next demand. Tonight, each action felt chosen. I walked to the small table by the door and set my keys in the ceramic bowl, the same bowl I'd owned for years but rarely noticed. The keys landed with a muted clink, metal against clay. I watched them rest there, no longer needed for escape. My phone came out of my pocket next. The screen lit up briefly, notifications stacked and waiting. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I turned the device off completely, the screen going dark in my hand. The silence that followed was immediate and profound, like a door closing somewhere deep inside my chest. I set the phone down beside the keys, creating a small still life of objects that had once governed my urgency. I moved through the apartment slowly, touching familiar things as if to reassure myself they were real. The back of the couch. The edge of the counter. The window glass, cool beneath my fingertips. Outside, the city continued its low, distant murmur, but it felt far away now, contained. This space was mine. It always had been, but I was only just arriving fully in it. In the bathroom, I washed my hands, watching the water carry the day away in thin, spiraling lines. My reflection looked different somehow. Not transformed. Just present. My eyes met mine in the mirror without flinching. I dried my hands and turned off the light, leaving the room in shadow. Back in the living room, I sat down and let my body sink into the cushion. The exhaustion was still there, deep and honest, but it no longer felt dangerous. It felt earned. I leaned back and closed my eyes, noticing how easily my breath came now, how my chest rose and fell without resistance. For years, rest had felt conditional, something I could access only after everything else was handled, everyone else appeased. Tonight, it arrived without negotiation. I didn't have to explain myself to it. I didn't have to justify the choice that brought me here. I stayed like that for a long time, doing nothing, and for the first time, it felt like enough. For once, I stayed conscious long enough to choose myself.